So tell us what happened when you first went to school.
Well, my father, I didn't have too many friends. I only had one friend in the building that we lived in. And I used to go out and play with the other kids, but they didn't understand me because I didn't speak English. I only spoke Yiddish, which my parents spoke around the house, and that's the only language I knew. When they didn't want me to understand something, they'd speak in Polish, because that's where they came from. And I went down to play with the kids, and
What did they call you?
I don't remember what they called me, but
Didn't they call you the little foreign kid?
yes, they did, actually. I remember that now. But I was born in Beth Israel Hospital on First Avenue, and I wasn't a foreign kid. I was an American-born kid.
No less.
But I started to learn English a little bit, but I remember coming home one day and I told my mother, "You're a basket." And my mother said, "Basket? What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, that's what the kids were saying." And I said, "What is, you know?" So finally I found out that what they were trying to say was, "You're a bastard." And my mother had a good laugh about that. So
Okay, how old were you then, roughly?
probably about 5 or 6 years old.
And what school were you in?
Well, at age 5, I was totally literate in Yiddish. I could read fluently, and I could speak fluently. And I remember when one of my parents' friends came over to the house. It was a man who was a friend of both my parents, and he asked me, "Who's in the house?" I said, "2 people." He says, "Who are they?" I said, "Me and my father." "Oh yeah, and my mother was there too." She didn't count as a people because I thought people were just men.
Huh. So was he talking to you in Yiddish?
Yes, of course.
So how did he say that in Yiddish? How many mensch?
No, wie viel Menschen, wer ist du in Stib? Who's here in the house? And I said, 2 Menschen.
So translate mention.
Menschen means people.
Oh, okay. And how old were you then, roughly?
I was probably around 4 years old.
So did you go to kindergarten?
No.
Okay, so first grade was your first grade?
Yes,
What
it was.
school was that?
I was in a school called RJJ, which is Rabbi Jacob Joseph. It was a yeshiva just a few doors down from my house on the same block.
And they accepted you speaking only Yiddish?
No, actually, the principal, he was there with a bunch of other teachers. Told my father that I was too young. I should come back next year with him when I'd be 6 years old. And my father whipped out a Yiddish newspaper and laid it on the desk. And he told me to read it. And I read it fluently, all the Yiddish. And the teachers they were gaped. They couldn't believe that I was able to read Yiddish so fluently and so well.
So even though you weren't fluent in English, they accepted you?
Yes. Okay. And the teachers, one of them, they grabbed me and hugged me and kissed me, and they thought maybe the new Vilna Gaon of, which, the Gaon from Vilna was a brilliant Talmudist and scholar. And, I actually turned out to be a lot less than that.
And in first grade, did they start teaching you English?
Yeah, I started learning English. I had Hebrew in the morning, and then after lunch, we had English studies with teachers who taught only English.
And math, I assume.
And math, arithmetic, and so on and so forth, yes.
Okay, and so at 5 you started in first grade. How long did you stay in RJJ?
Well, I was there a number of years till age 11, but I remember one incident that made me cry was the fact that my mother had taken me to the movies on a Saturday to the Loews Canal, which is a movie theater in the neighborhood. And somebody in my class saw me coming out of the movie theater on Saturday, it was Shabbos, and they told the teacher. So the teacher stood me up in front of the whole class. Everybody circled around me, all the other students, and they all pointed at me saying, "Goy, goy, goy," which means non-Jew, non-Jew, non-Jew. And I started to cry. I remember that very vividly.
Do you have any other stories from RJJ?
Oh, quite a few.
Okay, so let's start with what you remember from the youngest.
Okay, in my first grade, there was nothing very interesting or very traumatic in any way. When I got into second grade, I had a teacher named Kalmanovich. He was a brutal man in many ways, but one of them was if somebody wasn't right, didn't answer a question right, or misbehaved in any way, he'd say, "Come over, come here, let's shake hands." And he would grab the child's hand and squeeze with all his might until the boy, dropped to his knees and started kissing the Rebbe's shoes, saying, "Please let me go, let me go."
Did you meet him later on in life?
Yeah, later on when I was, I guess, 21 or 22, after I got married, my wife Sonia and I moved back to the Lower East Side. We couldn't afford anything fancier than the apartment we had. It was a one-bedroom, tiny apartment on Hester Street. Hester corner, it was Hester and Division Street and Suffolk Street. It was a triangular building, so there were three corners. Well, I was saying that we moved to that house on Hester Street and Division, and it was very close. It was only about 2 or 3 blocks away from the house I lived in earlier before I was married. One afternoon, I was went down to the subway on East Broadway, and lo and behold, who did I see on the platform? It was the same Rabbi Kalmanovich. So I walked up to him, I said, "Rabbi Kalmanovich, how are you?" And I shook hands with him. I grabbed him by the hand, and I started squeezing, and he tried to get away from me and pull his hand back, and I wouldn't let him, and I kept squeezing with all my might. It was my one revenge I had on the teacher. Finally, I let his hand go. I said, "Have a nice day, Rabbi," and I got on the train.
Okay. And continue on. I know you got a lot of stories.
Yeah, well, then we went to, my next teacher was Mr. Markov, who was also, he believed in hitting the child when he didn't know something or when he didn't behave. And at one time I was one, and one time I was the other, but he had a thick ruler, and he asked the boy to hold out his hand, and he slapped on the palm of your hand 2 or 3 good whacks, and you're left with a blistered hand, all reddened and blistered, and that wasn't very nice, very pleasant.
Were all these teachers basically Eastern Europeans?
Yeah, most of them were. They must have, it was just about the beginning of World War II, and there were a lot of refugees coming off the boats, and they had to get jobs. So if they knew anything about Judaism or about Talmud or prayers or Jewish, the Bible, they would be hired to give them a job. They knew nothing about teaching.
Well, they were all Orthodox?
Yes, they were all.
What about the ones who taught English and math? Were they all Orthodox?
No, they were not necessarily. They might have been, but it was not. Those were not classes and religious classes.
So they were considered Shagitzes, right?
No, they weren't. No, they weren't. They were Jewish.
They were conservative Jews?
I don't know what they were. I never asked. I didn't think to ask. But they were not there to teach religion. They were there to teach math and arithmetic spelling, writing, and so on and so forth.
Having taught the Satmar Chassids myself, when you made a plus sign when they made a plus sign on the board, were they allowed to, or did they turn up the bottom into a curly Q?
I don't remember that happening.
Okay. So what other teachers did you have run-ins with?
Well, the most traumatic teacher we had was a Mr. Podolsky. Maybe he was a rabbi, I have no idea, but he was an Orthodox man, and he taught Talmud, and he taught other things like that. This rabbi, this man was a bit of a, he shuffled around the room, he could not walk very fast, he couldn't run, and the kids were very disruptive because they were not interested in what he was saying, and he was just not a good teacher. He didn't know how to activate the class into learning and knowing what was being taught. We, on the other hand, took advantage of the situation. This Podolsky had very thick glasses. He couldn't see very well, and he shuffled around the room. So that it was no good. He couldn't chase after a kid because the kids could outrun him. But what we did was, in our anger at him, we took chalk and we put it on his seat. And when he sat down, he had a perfect target on his backside. And we all pulled out rubber bands and paper clips. And when he wasn't looking, we'd shoot him in the back with clips. If a kid was disruptive in any way or showed any kind of disinterest, he would throw a book at him. He'd pick up any book, whether it was a Siddur or a Chumash, and he'd fling it at him. 99% of the time he missed because everybody ducked. One particular instance I remember very well, there was a fellow who, in the back of the room, we had paint pictures framed in glass and of different things, and one of them was George Washington crossing the Delaware, and the student started yelling out to the teacher, "Hey, Rebbe, throw a book! I dare you, you fat slob!" And the teacher threw a book. He ducked. The book hit a picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware, and it went crashing down to the floor. At other times, we did other things. There was a guy named Pinchas Buxen in the class, who later went on to become a state senator. He saw steam coming out of the pipe, out of the relief valve on the radiator, so he kicked it and knocked it off, and the entire room was full of steam. So, and there was water all over, a slight amount of water, but we all said, "Hey, Rebbe, I have to go to the bathroom." One after each other, we went to the bathroom with an empty container, filled it up with water, came back and spilled it on the floor. A lot of us did that. By the time recess rolled around, the teacher was sloshing in water. It wasn't very deep. It was only an inch thick, or maybe a half inch, but there was water all over the room.
Uh-huh. What about the guy with the carrots?
Oh yeah, there was a kid who came in middle of the semester, a new kid, and they seated him right in front of the teacher. He came packed with a bag full of vegetables to have for lunch, raw vegetables. So he took out a bunch of carrots, and he whipped it, "Hey, Rebbe," and he flung it right in the teacher looked up and he flung it and hit him right in the face.
What happened to him?
He was ejected from the school the next day. They sent him home and they didn't want him back. But there were many other things that happened in that school. The most egregious thing that happened was one day we had to stay in a room during recess, which was between 11 and 11:30, something like that, 11:15, because it was raining outside. So we stayed in the room. We decided to play hide and seek. And we all dispersed in different places, some in the bathroom, some there was a big closet there where books were stored and coats were hung. It was a very high ceiling, about 12 feet high, I would think. And this one kid, Benjamin Sifri, said, "Hey, let's go into the closet rather, and we'll take some books and coats, and when the guy who's it is coming, we'll drop the books on him." So we all did that. We went into the closet. Sifri took along a whole briefcase full of books, and we climbed on top of the bookcases, and we waited for them to come in. Somebody, the kid who was it, to come in. The bell rang, and we just stood there, way up in the air, and the teacher came looking for us. He opened the door and walked into the closet. So Sifri picked up the big bag of books, and he slammed it down on the teacher's head, knocked him out cold. He was lying in the closet on the floor. We got terrified because we thought we killed him, or that he killed him. So we just threw all the books down and the coats and whatever we had as ammunition. And it was finally a heap of coats and books. And we jumped down and we went back and sat quietly in our seats. We were terrified. We didn't know what to do, so we did nothing.
What teacher was that?
That was Fat Johnny Podolsky.
Oh, and
We call him Father John or Fat Johnny. So he finally, we saw the doors opening, and all of a sudden he walked out, and we looked at him in amazement that he survived. We didn't know that he was still alive. And
how did he torture you kids?
Well, before that, I have to tell you something he said that was quite interesting. There's a chapter maybe it's in Isaiah. I'm not sure which of the prophets said this, but he said in Hebrew, "Banim gidalti v'romamti v'hem pashubi," which means I've raised and nurtured children, and they sinned against me, meaning us, for what we did to him.
This was in the aftermath of the books and the.
Oh yes, yes. And there were other things that happened. One kid, Abraham Trenk, he was so distraught from all this going on. He wanted to jump out of the fourth floor window we were on. He wanted to threatened to commit suicide. The window was open and he was up on the ledge, and we all ran up and we dragged him down, so to prevent him from doing that. Other kids. There was one young fella who was a very good artist. I think he was a Hungarian Jewish kid that came over, and he was in New York, and he escaped the Holocaust, no doubt. He was a good artist, and we published a newspaper. It was called The Adventures of Moshe the Ghost, and you could see drawings of Moshe the Ghost. He pictured doing different things in this concentration camp, which we had the school there and barbed wire fences all around it. That's how he drew it. And Moshe the Ghost would take a stick and pole vault over the wires to escape.
Wait, so it was a school behind the barbed wire?
Yeah, it was a school, and the school was RJJ. He tried to project that we were slaves in a concentration camp.
So what year? How old were you here?
I was still about maybe 6 years old or 7 years old.
Well, it had to be later than that.
No.
No?
No, it wasn't later than that.
Okay, 7 years old.
Yeah.
This was 1941?
No, I'm sorry, I'll take that back. I was 11 years old.
You were 11?
Yes, I was 11 years old.
And that was your last year at RJJ?
Yeah, what happened was I was so paralyzed with fear of getting hit by the teacher, getting a book thrown at me, for not knowing the answer, or for not misbehaving, which I really didn't do. I was the youngest kid in the class, and I was kind of almost paralyzed in my seat. I was afraid to move, and I couldn't move. I felt physically crippled. I think obviously nothing hurt me, but I was so traumatized that I just couldn't move. And they called the principal up, and they had to unscrew the desk from the floor, the chair, the seat, and they carried me home with it. And
in the chair? In
the chair. My house, fortunately, was only about 30, 40 feet away from the school, and they brought me up to my parents' apartment, and my mother was distraught, and she called a doctor, and the doctor came over and took a look at the situation. He saw and there was nothing physically wrong with me. I was just traumatized. So I was sent to Brooklyn Children's Hospital for observation. I was there one day, and I felt better, all completely healthy. So I jumped out of the bed, and I was helping the nurses with the really sick kids. And I remember my Aunt Anna came to the hospital, and she brought me a box of comic books. I think they were the illustrated copies of some of the famous novels around.
Classic comics?
Classic comics, right. And then from then I went into public school. And
wait, let's just jump back a second. So this convinced Bubba and Zeta to take you out of
matter of fact, the psychologist in the hospital suggested they do that because they said that don't send them back to that school, and they realized that they have to move me somewhere else because I was in danger of further problems if I would stay there.
Did you complain about this school before then to your parents?
I did at times.
And they thought you were just exaggerating?
Yes.